Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. In this lesson, we're going to go through Route 53 basics. We're going to go through Route 53 definitions. We'll talk about DNS servers. We'll take a look at how to understand how web servers are located, and we'll talk about pricing with Route 53. So let's get started with our definitions. So what is Route 53? The Essentials definition is that Route 53 is where you configure and manage web domains for websites or applications you host on AWS. Think of Route 53 as where you go to manage domains within AWS. The AWS definition is that Amazon Route 53 performs three main functions. The first is domain registration. Amazon Route 53 lets you register domain names such as example.com. So if you wanted to host a website online, you would register a domain name like linuxacademy.com or projectomega.com or example.com. Those are all examples of domain names. Then you have the domain name system service or DNS. Amazon Route 53 translates friendly domain names like www.example.com into IP addresses like 192.0.2.1. So whenever you go to access a website like example.com, that domain name is resolved to an IP address like 192.0.2.1. Amazon Route 53 responds to DNS queries using a global network of authoritative DNS servers, which reduces latency. So when you register a domain name, that domain name and the IP address used with that domain name and the IP address of the host that's holding the content related to that domain name and IP address are replicated across a global network of DNS servers. And then you have health checks. Amazon Route 53 sends automated requests over the internet to your application to verify that it's reachable, available, and functional. So you can use any combination of these functions. For example, you can use Amazon Route 53 as both your registrar and your DNS service. Or you could use Amazon Route 53 as the DNS service for a domain that you registered with another domain registrar. So if we registered the name example.com with a different domain registrar, we could use Route 53 as the DNS service for that domain name. And we're going to talk more about DNS as we continue through this section. So let's walk through the process of what happens when we go to access a domain name. Our goal here is to understand how domain names and DNS fit together to make a website accessible to a user. So let's say that we have this user that wants to go to linuxacademy.com. When the user types in that domain name into a web browser, what happens under the hood? What takes place that helps that user to be directed to linuxacademy.com? So let's walk through that process. So when the user types in linuxacademy.com, the computer thinks to itself that the user wants me to get the website linuxacademy.com. I don't know where its host server is located on the internet. I need that address. So our computer needs to figure out how to get to linuxacademy.com. So the computer itself doesn't know the answer to this. Here's what would happen if our computer tried to access linuxacademy.com, but it doesn't have the IP address. So you would type in the address linuxacademy.com, and even though the linuxacademy.com server is sitting out here, this computer does not know this IP address. Think of it like how we receive mail. If someone wants to send you a letter, they know your name, but if they don't know your address, there's no way for them to get that letter to you. The post office can't deliver the letter without your address. Once your address is written on the envelope, the Postal Service knows how to direct that mail to your physical location. So it's basically the same process here. We have a name, linuxacademy.com, and we have an address. So this computer needs to determine what the address is for our Linux Academy server. But if you think about it, there's such a large number of domain names that exist on the internet. There's no way that our computer could keep track of all of those addresses on its own. So your computer wants to query or talk to a third party that can tell it where to find the IP address of linuxacademy.com. Think about it as if we were actually trying to call you by phone. So it used to be if you wanted to call somebody by phone, you could go to a phone book and look up that person or that business by name, and the phone book will provide their phone number. But instead of using a phone book, instead what we do is we use a DNS server. So our computer wants to find linuxacademy.com IP address. It talks to the DNS server. A DNS server is a database of website domains and the IP addresses that correspond to those names. So whenever a computer wants to access a domain name, it talks to a DNS server, which has a list of the domain names and the IP addresses. Whoever's managing the linuxacademy.com server is a website admin. So that website admin has to register the domain name and IP address with a DNS provider if they want anyone to be able to find their website without knowing the IP address. So when a user wants to access linuxacademy.com, they talk to the DNS server, and the DNS server says, oh yes, I know the IP address of linuxacademy.com. The linuxacademy.com IP address is 192.168.0.1. Once our computer has that IP address, then it's able to locate and communicate with linuxacademy.com. So that's a quick example of how domain names and DNS servers work together to access the host server that's managing the content for the domain name linuxacademy.com. All right, so let's take a look at this in a diagram. So with Route 53, we would register our domain name. So we would register example.com or linuxacademy.com or even projectomega.com or some variation of those. So whatever domain name you want to register, you would register it with Route 53, and then Route 53 will provide the domain name and the IP address for the host that is hosting the content for that domain name. Then our user uses their computer and goes to their web browser and types in www.example.com, and that information is sent to the DNS server, which says you want the IP address 192.168.2.1 or whatever the IP address is. Then that user essentially goes through the internet, through Route 53, through our internet gateway to our Elastic Load Balancer, because the IP address provided to the DNS server is the IP address of your Elastic Load Balancer. And then the Elastic Load Balancer can then load balance and direct the traffic to either the web servers that we have that are hosting our website data. So kind of summarizing what Route 53 is, Route 53 is where we configure and manage our web domains for websites and for the applications that we host within AWS. So we can register domain names with Route 53. We can use Route 53, the domain name service, which would then take our domain names like example.com and translate those into the IP address for the host server. And then we also have the ability with Route 53 to do health checking to verify that the host or the application is actually up and functioning properly. So again, we can do any combination of these as we're using Route 53. Now let's take a look at pricing for Route 53. Be aware that there is no free tier usage available for Route 53. Now we haven't talked about all of these services, and we won't address all of these services in this section, but as you continue to work with Route 53 and you start to learn more, I wanted you to be aware that you would be charged based on your use of these services. And you can always refer back to the detailed pricing information that's available on the AWS website. So you're charged for Route 53 based on the number of hosted zones, based on the traffic flow, based on standard DNS queries, based on latency-based routing, GeoDNS queries, health checks, and if you register or transfer a domain name. So that concludes this lesson on Route 53 basics. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.